1913 to 1929, a shadow loomed over Dusseldorf in the nearby city Cologne. This monster stabbed and strangled his victims and in some cases drank their blood. No one was safe from this monster, and it is believed he had murdered 2 children before his 10th birthday. Before he was done, at least 9 people lost their lives at his cruel hands. Peter Kurten, the Vampire of Dusseldorf. Peter Kurten was born in 1883, 5 years before Jack the Ripper would stain the streets of London with blood and gore. He was the oldest of 13 children, and everyone in his family suffered the abuse of their cruel father. The father was a sadistic drunk who would stumble home to the 1-bedroom apartment the family shared to beat his wife and children before forcing himself onto his wife in front of the kids. It was not long before he would molest his daughters in the same way. Because of the extreme poverty in which the family lived, Kurten learned to steal food at a young age to stave off hunger. By the time he reached adulthood, he had already been in and out of jail many times. When reflecting on his crimes, Kurten would say that the brutality he suffered in jail and prison led to his wanting to get revenge on society through violence and murder. The first deaths attributed to Peter Kurten occurred when he was only 9 years old in 1892. While playing on the Rhine River with friends, he shoved another boy out of the raft they were in. When another boy jumped in to save him, Peter held his head under the water until he stopped thrashing. The incident was marked down as an accident. During his childhood, Kurten also learned of other disgusting acts from a dog catcher who lived in the same building as his family. This man taught him to use animals for his pleasure, and the two spent an indecent amount of time together assaulting animals. At the age of 16, Peter Kurten fled his home, and soon after his father was arrested for the horrors he committed against his own 13-year-old daughter. At this point, crime became Peter's only means of survival. The first murder Kurten committed as an adult was a 10-year-old girl named Christine Klein. He was lurking on the streets of Cologne after being released from custody for theft, looking for something to steal, when he saw the child asleep in her bed. Her room was above an inn. He crept in to assault her before stabbing her to death. Fluids left by the killer showed how excited he was during the attack. The next day, when her body was discovered, blame fell on her uncle, who had argued and threatened her father the night before. Meanwhile, the creature had gone to drink in a bar across the street so he could watch the results of the depraved murder. Peter followed the trial until at last the uncle was acquitted for lack of evidence. The disgusting creature also visited the young girl's grave and would become excited as he handled the soil. The true culprit would not be discovered for 18 years. Shortly after the murder of Christine Klein, Kurten attacked a 17-year-old girl named Gertrude Franken. He was burglarizing her home when he came across her asleep in her bed. He strangled her but was unsuccessful in killing her and fled before he was caught. As the First World War loomed, Kurten was called up into the German army. However, discipline and honest work did not suit him, and he deserted. He was soon caught and imprisoned throughout the war. While he was locked up, Kurten intentionally broke rules in order to stay in solitary confinement. After he was released in 1921, he moved in with his sister in a city called Altenburg. Soon after arriving, he met a former prostitute named Auguste Scharf. She owned a candy shop and would become his wife. She had herself spent several years in prison for shooting a man for standing her up at the marriage altar. The couple lived in Altenburg until 1925. Kurten found work as a molder, which was the same occupation as his abusive father. During this time, he also became a trade union organizer. However, this brief period of peacefulness fell apart as Kurten's self-control faltered. In 1925, the couple moved to Dusseldorf, and the creature known as Peter Kurten soon left his mark on the city. Over the next 3 years, he would commit arson and would attack at least 4 women. He strangled them until they were unconscious, sometimes during sex. In 1929, Kurten's restraint fell by the wayside, and once again he gave in to his murderous impulses. On the 3rd of February, he attacked a woman named Apollonia Kuhn. He pulled her into some bushes where they were concealed from view, then stabbed her repeatedly with a pair of scissors. Luckily, she survived the attack, but 1929 would be marked by other murders committed by the monster the press referred to as the Vampire of Dusseldorf. An 8-year-old girl named Rosa Ollinger was walking in the city on February 8th when Peter Kurten attacked her. He stabbed her 13 times and then attempted to light her body on fire using gasoline, but was not successful. Her remains were found shoved underneath a hedge. Less than a week later, he stabbed a mechanic named Rudolf Scheer to death. Again, he returned to the scene of the crime to watch the investigation unfold. In August of 1929, Kurten murdered 3 people, including 2 sisters. These killings began with the murder of Maria Hahn. Hahn was a young woman who hoped to find a husband. Kurten took her on a date, and the two spent several hours together on August 11, 1929, before they went into a meadow. He stabbed her in the head and body using his scissors and also strangled her as he knelt on her chest. It is thought that her ordeal lasted over an hour before she died of her injuries. This time, Peter Kurten did not want the body to be found, as he feared that his wife might connect the murder to the bloodstains on his clothing. Hahn was buried in a field, and Kurten visited the site periodically and even attempted to nail her to a tree to get the public outrage he craved. When she proves to be too heavy for the monster to lift, he returned her to the grave after fondling her corpse. Gertrude Hamaker was 5 years old, and her adopted sister Louise Lenzen was 14 when they crossed paths with the monster as they walked home from a fair. He stabbed them to death on the 21st. He killed Gertrude first after sending her sister to buy him cigarettes in return for some money. When Louise returned, he pounced on her, stabbing her repeatedly in the chest and throat. Kurten also bit her neck and sucked blood from the wound, reinforcing the nickname given to him by the press. Bloody footprints led investigators to believe she had tried to flee her attacker. The day after he murdered the sisters, Kurten attacked a 27-year-old woman named Gertrude Schulte. The creature approached the woman and propositioned her. When she refused, he shrieked, "Dan Sturb," which translates to, "Then, die." He then stabbed her repeatedly in her head, neck, and torso. She narrowly escaped death and could only tell investigators that her attacker was roughly 40 years old. Kurten attacked 2 more people in September who survived before shifting his methods again to throw police off his trail and to make the killings seem unconnected. The weapon he chose to commit the next murders was a hammer. On the 30th of September, Kurten met a young woman named Ida Reuter alone near a train station in Dusseldorf. Somehow, he convinced her to go to a cafe with him. Then the pair walked through a small park. Once they were in a secluded area, he pulled out his hammer and beat her as he raped her before leaving her remains to be discovered in the park. On the 11th of October 1929, a 22-year-old woman named Elizabeth Dorier fell prey to the depraved monster. Kurten approached her outside of a theater and talked her into joining him for a drink at a nearby cafe. After the cafe, they took a train to Grafenberg to walk along the Dussel River. Using the hammer, Kurten struck her in the head before raping her. When he was done abusing her, he once again beat her with the hammer. When she was found early the next morning, she was still alive but died soon after in the hospital. The next pair of women Kurten attacked would escape. On the 25th of October, Kurten broke his hammer as he attacked the women, allowing them to escape. But, less than 2 weeks later, a 5-year-old girl named Gertrude Alberman would not be so lucky. Kurten once again had a pair of scissors to use as his murder weapon. He took the child to a deserted area of the city, then lunged at her throat, strangling her, and stabbing the scissors into her temple. After she collapsed onto the ground, he continued stabbing her dozens of times in the head and chest before concealing her remains under some foliage. The different methods of murder and backgrounds of the victims led the police to believe that they were committed by multiple killers, and more than 9,000 suspects were interviewed and many times more were listed as potential culprits. However, the noose was tightening on the vampire of Dusseldorf, and the murder of young Gertrude Alberman was the last murder that he would commit. Throughout 1930, Kurten attacked several more women with his hammer, though they survived. One of these surviving victims was a 20-year-old woman named Maria Budlick. When she was verbally accosted by a man, a stranger came to her aid. The stranger was Peter Kurten. He invited the young woman to his apartment, but instead took her to the woods where he attacked her. When he grabbed her by the throat, she screamed, and he hesitated, which allowed her to escape. She would write of the ordeal in a letter to a friend, but because of an incorrect address on the envelope, the letter was opened by a postal employee and passed along to the police. She was able to give police the address of her attacker, and the landlord confirmed the man was Peter Kurten. Knowing the end was near, he soon confessed his crimes to his wife and told her to turn him in to get the reward for his capture. Once in police custody, Kurten readily admitted he was the killer that they had been searching for. It was at this point he admitted to the unsolved murder of Christine Klein and 8 other murders. He also told police how he had drunk the blood from 3 of his victims, and that when he murdered Maria Hahn, he had consumed so much of her blood that he became sick and vomited. On April 13, 1931, Kurten's trial began. He was charged with 9 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. He attempted to claim insanity. However, a number of psychiatrists were brought in to testify against this assertion. During the trial, he was kept in an iron cage to protect him from his victims' relatives. After a 10-day trial, Kurten was found guilty and sentenced to death, to be carried out on July 1, 1931. For his last meal, Kurten had Wiener Schnitzel, fried potatoes, and a bottle of wine. Moments before he was beheaded by guillotine, he asked the psychiatrist who was present whether he would live for a few moments after his head was removed. When he was told yes, he said that the sounds of his own blood gushing from his neck would be the pleasure to end all pleasures. The killer's head was kept for analysis, but there were no noticeable abnormalities which would account for his monstrous behavior. His head can still be seen today in Ripley's Museum in Wisconsin.